We're going to start with Ki Ladonai HaMelucha U'Moshel Bagoyim. You might recognize this line from the end of Psukei de Zimra. Ki Ladonai HaMelucha U'Moshel Bagoyim sounds like a great verse for Malkhuyot. God has the kingship and will rule over the nation. This is sort of one of the tensions that we see in Rosh Hashanah, where if you ask someone, someone who's going to shul, they would say, of course God is king. So why are we crowning God as king? I thought God already is king. So God isn't king for everybody. And that's part of the wish and the desire is to see that world emerge. So we're going to see how that plays out in this Midrash from Esther Rabbah. Rabbi Ibo said, it's written, K'tiv ki ladonai melucha moshel bagoyim. This seems to be something in the present. Right now, God is ruling over nations, and right now, God has kingship. But elsewhere, it says in Esther, "V'temer al kisei malchuto," "Kishevet hamelech al kisei malchuto," talking about Achashverosh. Why does it say when Achashverosh was sitting on the throne of his kingship, as opposed to, a commentator suggests, kisei hamelucha? He's sitting on the throne of kingship. The fact that Malchuto is possessive seems to mean that Achashverosh is sitting on someone else's throne, on the not the throne of his kingship, Achashverosh, but someone else's kingship. Capital H his kingship. And so the Midrash goes on to explain L'she'avar hayta melucha b'Yisrael. When in the past there was kingship with Israel. But once they sinned, then the kingship was taken away from them and given over to the nations of the world. As it says in Ezekiel, I will sell the land into the hands of the evil one. And then you get a political comment, like live political commentary here from Rabbi Yitzchak, who says that that's the apitropsin, the Roman governors. They're the evil ones whom the power has been given to. Okay, but Yisrael osim tshuva, when Israel does tshuva, then the Holy Blessed One will take from the idol worshippers and return Melucha to Israel. And when does that happen? At that moment, when the saviors come and they go up on Mount Zion to judge Har Esav, then and only then, Vayta, at that moment, then Adonai will have Melucha. So it seems like what we're seeing in this Midrash is Ki Ladonai HaMelucha might be a report of the olden times, but only when we do tshuva, Yisrael osim tshuva, might we go back to that original state. So we're both on the one hand saying that God has kingship. It's sort of like a report of the present. God is currently having the kingship in God's possession, U'Moshel Bagoyim, and is ruling over the nations. But also, that's really a prediction of the future, because in order for that to really happen, we need to do tshuva for the kingship to be properly restored. And therefore, this Malchut verse is sort of wrapped up in our tshuva, process. So that's Ki Ladonai Melucha Moshel Bagoyim. This you might remember from the Psalms of Kabbalat Shabbat, Adonai Malach Geut Lavesh. This is the last Psalm in Kabbalat Shabbat, Psalm 93. And again, like a very helpful verse for the Malkhuyot section, in which God is called king. And I should say that in a number of different traditions of the Machzor, today this is standard in pretty much all traditions of the Machzor. But in other traditions of the Machzor, other of the kingship psalms that are sort of in the psalms in the 90s, the chapters of the 90s of the book of Psalms, other selections are chosen. So it's the Adonai Malach that's really the essence here, even though reasonable people could choose other Adonai Malach psalms from the book of Psalms. We chose this one, Adonai Malach Geut Lavesh. And I love this midrash that speaks about what it means for God to wear Geut. Now, if you remember the word Geut, Ga'ava, it can potentially have a negative connotation like pride and haughtiness, but it's also something that we recognize as an attribute of God from the Song of the Sea, Ki Ga'o Ga'a. right? Sus v'roch lo rama vayam. That's when God takes the stance of the Savior at the sea. It's not that God is being haughty, but God is, as they translate JPS, is robed in grandeur. There's some sort of grand display of salvation and rescuing that accompanies God's kingship. It's not just that God is king and sitting on a throne and making administrative decisions. It's rather the salvation side of the kingship that's at play with the geut word, with the ga'o ga'a. And one of the midrashim connects this to that scene. But let's just see what it means for God to wear, because it's not just that God is ga'o ga'a, but rather God is wearing some sort of geut. And we see in the next line, lavesh Adonai oz. So we have oz and geut seem to be sort of parallels with each other, and they're both something that God wears. It's the clothing of God, and that's going to be the spark for our midrash that we're going to look at. But just so we get the situated on this pasuk, it's not only that it shows up on Kabbalat Shabbat, where we probably are most familiar with it, but also it's the psalm of the day for Friday. And in the section of the Gemara that describes why each psalm is said by the Levites on that particular day. So on this one, we say Al Shem Shegamar Melachto, because God finished all the work, by Hulu Hashamayim on the Friday, and then the sort of natural result of finishing the creation of the world is Umalach Alehem, right? So Oseu Konehu, the one who created the world, then gets to sort of rule over the world. And that's the reason that's associated with Friday, because Shabbat is, I guess, a sort of a mini crowning of God every week. If Rosh Hashanah is sort of the annual crowning, then, once God finishes the creation of the world, every Friday God is also rising up to the throne. But this is the midrash that I really wanted to focus on, which is the contrast between a godly king and an earthly king. I think so much of the imagery around God being a king is challenging, especially for Americans who didn't, who grew up, rebelling against the king and celebrating a non-king sort of image of ruling. But even if you are loving the queen and all that other stuff, it still can be a challenging image sometimes. What I love about the midrashim is that oftentimes they're contrasting God's kingship with the human kingship. That is to say, whatever associations you have with being with a human king, they're the opposite for God. And this is a great example with our pasuk here. So Melech Basar Vadam, a flesh and blood king, Ein Lo Shiv Lebusho. You never wear the clothes of a flesh and blood king. It's not like they walk into the closet and say, should I wear my robe today? No, why don't you wear it? You just never think about wearing a king's clothes. But the Yisrael lovshin lebusho shel HaKadosh Baruch Hu, but Israel actually wears the clothes of God. God is a king who shares God's clothes. U'ma'u lebusho shel HaKadosh Baruch Hu. What are those clothes? Oz. The clothing is strength. Shneimar lavesh Adonai oz hitazar. So we have in the second line of the pasuk here. God is not just ruling as king. God is wearing geut and God is wearing oz. And we know when it's Hanoli Israel, God also gave the oz to Israel. Adonai oz le'amo yitain, Adonai yavarech and amo v'shalom. So there's this connection of psukim here where God wears oz, God wears strength. That's part of what it means for God to rule as king. But the fact that God is king doesn't mean that God is a monopoly on these aspects of what it means to be king. God actually shares these clothes with Israel, with God's subjects. And that's part of I think the praise that we're adopting here is that when we call God Adonai Malach Geut Lavesh, Lavesh Adonai Oz Hitazar, we're also offering an opportunity for us to think about how we might adopt, literally embody and wear the clothing of God's kingship, the strength and the grandeur that is associated with God is not distinct and totally separate from us. Those are our fourth and fifth verses from Malkhuyot. Wish everybody that we have some ability to partake in Oz and wearing Oz and Geut, and we'll see you tomorrow for Se'u Sha'arim, the sixth verse of Malkhuyot. Have a good day.